Hi viewers, in this video I will show you how I replaced the rear bearing and hub assembly on my Jeep Patriot.
First, the vehicle was parked on level ground with the transmission shifter in park position. Because the parking brake cannot be engaged when the rear hub assembly is replaced, I used forward chocks to block the wheels on the opposite side. This prevented the vehicle from moving forwards or backwards. Then I loosened the 5 lug nuts before jacking up the rear left side of the vehicle. To improve safety, I used a 3-ton floor jack and 2 3-ton jack stands to keep the vehicle jacked up. Then I undid the lug nuts and I removed the wheel. I already knew the bearing was defective. The brake drum was stuck on the hub, so instead of hammering it to unseize it, I used my modified three-jaw puller with loop anchors. The tie-down strap was inserted in the anchors and tightened to firmly hold the jaws around the brake drum while pulling. The strap also prevents the jaws from opening if the drum pops out during the pulling. As soon as the drum was unseized, I removed the rust from the inner edge of the drum and the hub to show how easy it was to refit it only a few seconds later. In this video clip you can hear the grating noise of the bad bearing when I was spinning it. The overall brake components were not very dirty, so instead of using brake cleaner, I simply vacuumed the parts as shown. The hydraulic brake line is the only part that holds the brake backing plate assembly when the bearing and hub is not attached to the trailing arm. The ABS wheel speed sensor is held in place with a 10 mm hex bolt. With a bit of wiggling, I had no problem to undo the sensor. The O-ring prevents the water and contaminants from getting inside the bearing assembly. The bearing and hub assembly is fastened with 4 bolts from behind the trailing arm. Those bolts were the 2009 original ones, and it was the first time they had to be undone. When a bolt like this one is not well positioned, a wobble extension bar or a U-joint socket should be used. Later, even if the 4 bolts were undone, the hub in contact with the trailing arm, the spacer, and the brake backing plate were still seized together because of the rust buildup. Before pulling out the hub and bearing assembly, I attached the backing plate with a bungee cord to hold the backing plate in place in case of emergency. My hub removal tool is simply a modified big bolt combined with a washer, a big nut, and a steel cap that are used with a wrench and locking pliers. To begin, I positioned the bolt on the forward side of the hub. Then I inserted the steel cap when the bolt and the nut were properly fitted. After 2 or 3 turns, I was able to feel that the base of the hub was partially extracted from the trailing arm. At that moment, to better protect the brake line in case the backing plate would get too loose, I secured the backing plate in place with a tie-down strap. Then I loosened the other side of the hub assembly and I removed it easily. In this close-up view you can see the rust buildup on the edge of the trailing arm, the spacer, the backing plate, and the hub itself. Here I show the difference between a 15-year-old hub and a brand new one. To fit the new part properly, I made sure to remove the rust from the steel parts that had to be in contact with the new hub and bearing assembly. Next, I removed the 2 files and I aligned the brake backing parts with 4 L-shaped steel angles. After, to see if the hub assembly was fitting easily, I partially inserted it in the other parts. Depending on the type of rust buildup that is present between the spacer and the adjacent parts, the alignment can be affected. To prevent a bad wheel alignment, I remove the plate to sand out most of the rust on the two sides. To sand the surfaces between the backing plate and the trailing arm, I used a portion of a 50 grit sanding belt. This is rust debris that fell on the floor during sanding. When the parts were clean enough, I refitted the spacer. I also cleaned the threads of the 4 bolts to be able to easily tighten them later. I removed the steel angles and I loosely inserted the bolts in the holes. The hub was fitted and aligned properly. Then the 4 bolts were loosely tightened by hand. When the backing plate was safely held in place, I removed the tie-down strap. After, I tightened the 4 bolts to specs in a crisscross pattern to properly sit the wheel bearing and hub assembly. Next, I fitted the ABS speed sensor and I tightened the bolt to specs. Finally, I installed the brake drum and the wheel.
Without my modified puller and my hub removal tool, it would have been very difficult to do this repair work. So it's important to be well prepared when working with rusted parts.